The mist hung low over the kingdom, curling like ghostly fingers around the stone walls of the Vampire King's castle. Beyond the gates, the forests whispered secrets in the wind, and the moon shone pale, casting silver light over everything it touched. For centuries, the castle had stood as a monument to power, mystery, and fear, but tonight it awaited a new presence, one that could shift the balance of the ancient curse that weighed upon its lord. Sister Ilara had never imagined she would walk these halls. Barely 18, she had grown up in the quiet convent of St. Elric, learning prayers, herbs, and the stories of saints whose courage had shaped the world. Yet the letter that arrived 2 nights ago had changed everything. It bore the seal of the Vampire King himself, and though the words were polite, they carried an undeniable weight. Bring the relic. Trust no one but yourself. You are to enter the castle at dusk. Speak only when required. Fail not. Her heart had hammered at the thought of leaving the convent. Fear had rooted her to the ground, but curiosity, dangerous, thrilling curiosity, had won. She had packed lightly, carrying only her faith, the relic, and a small book of prayers. As she walked along the misty road toward the castle, the trees seemed to lean closer, their shadows long and watchful. Every step made her stomach tighten, and yet she could not turn back. The castle loomed as the sun fell, its towers like jagged teeth against the twilight sky. The drawbridge lowered with a groan, as if acknowledging her arrival. Guards clad in dark armor stood silent, their faces hidden behind masks of black steel. One of them stepped forward, bowing slightly. "You may enter," he said, his voice low and hollow. "The king awaits." Ilara nodded, swallowing a lump of fear. She stepped across the bridge, the cold stone underfoot sending shivers through her. The doors opened into a vast hall, the ceilings high and shadowed. Candles flickered along the walls, casting light and darkness in equal measure. Her eyes widened. Everything about this place seemed alive, yet quiet, as if the stones themselves remembered every secret ever whispered within them. From the shadows at the far end of the hall, he emerged, the Vampire King, tall, regal, with eyes that gleamed like obsidian under the candlelight. His presence was magnetic, almost terrifying. The air seemed to thicken around him, carrying the scent of ancient forests, old stone, and something undefinable, something dangerous. Ilara's breath caught, and she stepped back slightly, but he did not move toward her. Instead, he regarded her carefully, as though measuring her courage, her spirit, and her very soul. "You are brave," he said finally, his voice smooth, rich, and dark. "Few would walk this path willingly." I am here as you requested, my lord," Ilara managed, bowing slightly. Her hands trembled, clutching the relic close to her chest. He inclined his head once, acknowledging her obedience, though his eyes remained unreadable. "Speak only when necessary," he reminded her, a faint shadow of a smile crossing his lips. "The castle does not tolerate idle chatter, nor does it forgive hesitation." She nodded again, trying to steady her racing heart. The hall seemed endless, but he led her through it with measured steps. The corridors twisted and turned, lined with tapestries depicting battles and ancient ceremonies, their threads glimmering faintly as if imbued with magic. The castle had a heartbeat, she realized, slow and deliberate, and it pulsed around her, filling her with both awe and unease. Finally, they reached a chamber unlike any she had ever seen. The room was circular, with black stone walls etched in silver runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. In the center, a table of dark wood held a silver chalice and a small, intricately carved box, the relic she had brought. "Place it here," the king instructed, nodding toward the table. Ilara obeyed, her fingers brushing the cold wood. The moment she did, The runes on the walls flared, casting shimmering light across the room. A warmth spread through the chamber, though the air remained cool. The relic seemed to hum, as if recognizing the power in the room. "You have courage," the king said again, stepping closer. "But courage alone will not see you through the nights ahead. You must learn to follow, to obey, to trust, and sometimes to swallow fear whole, without hesitation." Ilara shivered at the weight of his words. There was something commanding in the way he spoke, a mixture of authority, danger, and unspoken longing. She understood instinctively that her journey here was more than a task. It was a test of her very self. "You may rest," he said after a pause, stepping back into shadow. "The lessons begin at dawn." Ilara sank onto a velvet-covered chair at the edge of the room, her mind racing. Fear twisted in her stomach, but beneath it, a spark of something she could not name stirred. It was not desire, not yet. It was curiosity, and perhaps hope. The night was long and restless. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, and somewhere deep within the castle, a wolf howled in answer. Ilara sat by the window, clutching her book of prayers, yet found little comfort in the words. The king's gaze lingered in her mind, cold and intense, yet strangely protective. She felt as if she had crossed into another world entirely, one where every shadow had meaning and every silence spoke volumes. When dawn finally came, a silver light poured into the chamber, and the king appeared once more. He moved with the grace of one who has lived centuries, yet every step carried weight, as if each moment of his life had shaped him into this singular presence. "The first lesson is simple," he said. "You will learn to face fear without fleeing. You will learn to act without hesitation, and you will learn to trust the unknown, even when it terrifies you." He gestured toward a door that opened into the castle's inner courtyard. The mist had lifted slightly, revealing statues of long dead rulers whose eyes seemed to follow her. The courtyard was overgrown with vines, shadows pooling in the corners, and in the center, a circle of black stone glimmered with an unnatural light. "Step into the circle," he instructed. "It will show you what lies hidden within yourself." Ilara's hands trembled. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, feeling the cold stone underfoot. The circle seemed to hum, vibrating against her soul. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but the king's eyes silenced her. She swallowed hard, recalling his words. "Swallow fear whole, without hesitation." The moment she stood fully within the circle, a strange sensation overtook her. Shadows swirled at the edges of her vision, and whispers echoed in her mind, soft and compelling. Memories she had not yet lived flickered like sparks in the darkness. Moments of triumph, of failure, of laughter, of tears. She felt fear, yes, but also a strange strength rising within her. The king watched silently, his expression unreadable, but his presence anchored her. He was both the storm and the calm, both the danger and the guide. She realized with a shiver that her survival depended not only on courage but on trust in him and in herself. Then the whispers grew louder, forming words she could understand. "You are ready, but are you willing?" Ilara swallowed again, her throat dry, her hands trembling. "I am willing," she said aloud, though her voice barely carried. A low hum filled the air, and the circle of stone glimmered brighter. Shadows coalesced, forming shapes that danced around her, testing her resolve. She stood her ground, focusing on the king's presence, letting his strength guide her. Finally, the shadows dissolved, leaving her alone in the courtyard. She had passed the first test. Her knees shook, and sweat beaded her brow, but a spark of pride warmed her chest. She had faced fear, and she had not faltered. The king's voice cut through the silence. "Well done, But this is only the beginning. The nights ahead will demand more than courage. They will demand wisdom, patience, and the willingness to surrender control when the time comes. Ilara nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. There was a depth to this castle, to this king, that she had only begun to grasp. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but she felt a stirring of determination. She would not fail, not herself, not the king, not the destiny that had brought her here. As she turned to leave the courtyard, she felt a glance from him that lingered far longer than necessary. It was not desire. It was something deeper, heavier, curiosity, respect, and perhaps the faintest trace of longing. Her stomach tightened again, though not with fear this time. The first day had ended. The lessons were only beginning, and already Ilara felt herself being changed, not by magic alone, but by the presence of the vampire king, whose very being seemed to challenge everything she had ever known. As night fell once more and the castle whispered with secrets, she realized that her journey would not just test her courage, it would test her soul. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, she felt that the king, too, would be changed by her presence. A single thought echoed in her mind as she drifted into a restless sleep. This is only the beginning. The morning light filtered weakly through the tall windows of the castle, casting pale streaks over the black stone floors. Sister Ilara sat quietly on the edge of her chair, her hands folded over the relic, though sleep had left her restless. Shadows moved across the walls, alive with the history and secrets of centuries past. Even the castle itself seemed to watch her, as if it knew she had passed the first test. But it was only the beginning. The vampire king appeared in the doorway without warning, his presence commanding attention without a word. Ilara rose immediately, bowing slightly, though the king's eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. "Today's lesson is not of courage alone," he said, his voice deep, smooth, and almost hypnotic. "It is of perception. You will learn to see what others hide, and to face what you fear within yourself." He led her down twisting corridors she had not seen before. The walls seemed narrower here, the air thicker. The torches flickered and cast moving shadows, some of which appeared almost alive. Ilara felt a chill crawl along her spine, but she held her ground. The king's presence, cold yet steady, was both frightening and grounding. Finally, they arrived at a grand hall. The ceiling was lost in darkness, and the floor was covered with a shallow pool of black water that reflected the flickering torchlight like shattered glass. Strange symbols were etched along the edges, glowing faintly with silver light. "Step into the water," the king commanded, his eyes fixed on her. "Do not hesitate. Do not question. Let it reveal the truth." Ilara hesitated. The water was cold, deeper than it appeared, and she could sense something hidden beneath its dark surface. Yet she remembered his words. Swallow fear whole, without hesitation. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, feeling the icy liquid lap at her ankles. It spread quickly, biting at her skin, but she forced herself to remain steady. The moment her feet touched the center of the pool, shadows began to rise from the water, swirling around her like smoke. Whispering voices filled the hall, murmuring doubts and fears she did not even know she possessed. Memories of past mistakes, imagined failures, and unspoken regrets surfaced, pressing against her mind. Her hands clenched the relic tightly, grounding her. The king's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "Do not speak. Do not flee. Swallow it. Own it." Ilara closed her eyes, forcing herself to endure. The cold seeped into her bones, the shadows pressed against her soul, and yet she did not move. Slowly, the voices began to fade, leaving only silence. A warmth spread through her chest, subtle but undeniable, as if the water itself recognized her courage. When she opened her eyes, she found herself facing a vision within the water. She saw herself, older and stronger, walking confidently through the castle, her eyes clear, her spirit unbroken. She saw herself standing beside the vampire king, not as a subordinate, but as someone who could challenge him, guide him, and even protect him. The king's eyes met hers across the hall. "You are stronger than you believe," he said quietly. "And yet, strength is not enough. You must understand hearts as well as minds. You must see the truth, even when it is painful." Elara shivered, realizing his lesson was only partly about fear. It was about trust, insight, and connection, the ability to perceive what others hid behind walls of pride, power, or curse. The pool rippled, and the vision disappeared, leaving her standing in the cold water alone. She stepped out, shivering, but feeling a new sense of clarity. The king handed her a cloak, black as midnight, and nodded. "Tonight you will learn the first test of loyalty. A visitor approaches the castle, one who seeks to disrupt the balance here. You must discern friend from foe, and you must act wisely." The day passed in tense anticipation. Elara explored the castle cautiously, noting the intricate carvings on the walls, the flickering torchlight that seemed to bend shadows toward her, and the faint traces of magic lingering in the air. Every step reminded her of the delicate balance of power, the hidden danger, and the fragile trust she had begun to place in the king. By nightfall, the moon hung high, casting silver light across the castle's courtyard. A figure emerged from the mist, a messenger clad in dark robes, his face hidden beneath a hood. He carried a scroll sealed with crimson wax. Elara stepped forward, feeling the weight of responsibility press down on her. She could not speak unless necessary, but she could move, act, and observe. The king watched silently from the shadows, his presence a steady anchor. The messenger stopped before her, bowing slightly. "For the king," he said in a low voice, offering the scroll. Elara took it carefully, noticing the trembling in her own hands. The wax seal bore the king's insignia, yet she sensed an undercurrent of danger in the man's stance. She opened the scroll with deliberate caution, reading the message aloud in her mind. "The Northern Alliance moves against the castle. They seek the relic. Trust no one. The night will test loyalty. Shadows may deceive you." Her heart pounded. The message confirmed what the king had said. The night would demand wisdom, discernment, and courage. She looked up at him, but he only inclined his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Follow your instincts," he said finally. "Observe, decide, act, and remember, your choices will affect more than your own fate." The night deepened, and with it, the tension grew. Elara moved silently through the corridors, listening, watching, learning. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and every step seemed to echo against invisible walls. Her senses sharpened, and she realized that the castle itself was alive, its magic responding to fear, courage, and intention. Suddenly, a figure appeared before her, a dark-robed intruder, moving with fluid grace. Elara froze, her mind racing. She had been warned that deception would come tonight. Was this foe or an ally testing her resolve? The intruder's eyes gleamed from beneath the hood. "Hand over the relic," the voice commanded, smooth and cold, "or your master will fall." Elara's hands tightened around the relic. She remembered the lessons of the day: perception, trust, courage. She did not panic. She studied the intruder, noting subtle tells, the hesitation in their stance, the way their cloak brushed the floor, the faint scent of iron in the air. Something felt off. "Who sent you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. The intruder hesitated, and in that moment, Elara acted. She reached for a rune etched on the wall, a simple ward she had memorized from the relic's instructions. She whispered the incantation, and the runes flared with silver light, binding the intruder in place. The figure struggled, but the magic held firm. Ilara realized then that she had learned more than courage. She had begun to understand power, control, and the delicate dance of trust and authority. The king stepped from the shadows, his expression unreadable. "Well done," he said, his voice low and approving. "You saw the truth behind the illusion. Few could have done what you just did. Few could have resisted fear and hesitation." Ilara's chest swelled with pride, but she did not relax. The night was far from over, and the castle was alive with secrets she had only begun to perceive. The intruder collapsed under the magic, revealed at last to be a mere servant of the Northern Alliance, sent to test the defenses and gauge the king's strength. Ilara knelt beside them, ensuring they were unharmed, showing compassion even amid danger. The king observed silently, perhaps noting her empathy as a strength as well as her courage. When the intruder was gone, the king guided Ilara to the chamber of lessons. "You have done well," he said, "but the path ahead will demand more than observation. You must act, you must decide, and you must trust both yourself and me in ways that will test every belief you hold. Tonight, you saw your courage. Tomorrow, you will see your heart." Ilara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. She was changing, growing in ways she had never imagined. The fear that had gripped her upon entering the castle was still present, but it no longer controlled her. Instead, it was a tool, a guide, a teacher. As she lay in her bed that night, staring at the high, shadowed ceiling, she felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She was beginning to understand the depths of the king's world, the power he wielded, and the responsibility she had stepped into. And yet, even in the quiet, she felt it, the lingering, unspoken tension between them. It was not desire in the ordinary sense, but something deeper, more electric, the weight of two beings beginning to recognize each other's strength, vulnerability, and hidden truths. The castle whispered around her as sleep began to claim her. Shadows shifted, the wind sighed through the towers, and somewhere deep in the distance, a wolf howled in reply to the moon. Ilara knew one thing with certainty. The tests were far from over. The king's lessons would become harder, the shadows deeper, and the truths more difficult to face. And somewhere, in the silence between fear and courage, she could feel that both she and the vampire king were on the verge of change. Whether for salvation or destruction, only the coming nights would reveal. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and whispered to herself, almost in awe, "I will not falter. I will not fail. I will face whatever comes, even if it frightens me to my core." And in the deepest shadows of the castle, the king watched, sensing the stirrings of something rare, a spark of courage, empathy, and understanding in one so young, so innocent, and so remarkably brave. The dawn broke over the castle like a silver promise, pale light spilling across black stone and ivy-choked walls. Sister Ilara stood at the edge of the highest tower, staring out over the kingdom. The forests stretched endlessly, mist curling over the valleys like living spirits. She felt the weight of the past nights pressing upon her, the tests, the shadows, the lessons, but she also felt a strange, unwavering strength. The vampire king appeared silently behind her, his long cloak brushing the stone floor. His presence, once intimidating and distant, now felt layered, still powerful, still dangerous, but tempered by understanding. "You have changed," he said softly. His voice carried no command now, only observation. "You face fear without flinching. You see truths others ignore. And You trust, even when it is difficult. Elara nodded, her hands tightening slightly around the relic she had carried from the convent. I have learned because you guided me, she said honestly, but I have also learned to trust myself. A faint smile flickered across the king's face, almost imperceptible. Yes, that is the lesson most fail to grasp. Courage alone is not enough. Strength alone cannot break chains, both physical and of the soul. One must see, understand, and act with clarity. Their words lingered in the cold air, and for a moment there was only silence. Then the bells of the castle tolled, low and solemn, echoing through the halls. Something had shifted. The castle itself seemed to grow restless. You are ready for the final trial, the king said, his eyes narrowing slightly, a spark of urgency igniting in their black depths. The Northern Alliance will strike before nightfall. They seek the relic and the heart of this castle. You must act, you must lead, and you must trust me, even when you cannot see the way forward. Elara's heart pounded. She had faced fear. She had discerned truth. She had learned courage. But leading, confronting real danger, was another matter entirely. Yet she found herself unafraid. The lessons of the past nights had tempered her. Fear was no longer her master. It was her tool, her guide. The king led her to the armory, where weapons of strange design hung on the walls, shimmering faintly in the morning light. He handed her a silver-edged dagger, its hilt carved with runes that glowed softly. This will not fight for you, he said. It will only answer to your will. The rest is up to you. Elara accepted it with a steady hand, feeling the hum of magic thrumming through the blade. She could almost sense the castle itself lending her strength, as if the stones, the shadows, and even the wind were allies in this moment. By nightfall, the sky was cloaked in darkness, and the Northern Alliance approached. Shapes moved through the mist, silent and deadly, their intentions clear in every step. Elara's pulse raced, but she did not falter. The king stood beside her. Silent and watchful, a shadow of strength and command. You lead, he said simply, a command wrapped in trust. I will follow your guidance. Her breath caught at the words. For the first time, the balance of power shifted. She was no longer the novice. She was the one making decisions, guiding the flow of action. Her eyes scanned the battlefield, her mind calculating, predicting, discerning friend from foe. She raised her hand, and a subtle gesture directed the castle's wards and magical defenses, sending barriers of light and shadow to guard the most vulnerable points. The enemy faltered, taken aback by the precision and confidence of the defense. Elara moved with purpose, confronting intruders with the silver dagger. She did not seek to harm needlessly, but her resolve forced them to retreat, their plans unraveling under the weight of her courage. In the midst of the conflict, she caught sight of the king, standing like a dark sentinel, moving with deadly grace. Yet even in his power there was restraint. He did not strike recklessly, did not overreach. Together their movements formed a silent dance of trust, anticipation, and coordination. The battle reached its climax when the leader of the Northern Alliance, a tall figure clad in black armor, stepped forward, attempting to breach the inner sanctum. Elara's heart pounded. She remembered the lessons of fear, perception, and courage. She took a deep breath, stepping forward to meet him. "You will not pass," she declared, her voice steady and commanding. The figure paused, recognizing the authority in her words, the clarity in her eyes. The shadows around them seemed to quiver in response, sensing the strength of will and trust radiating from her. A tense confrontation followed, the leader attempting trickery, illusions, and deceit. But Elara remained calm, seeing through the falsehoods, perceiving truth beneath the masks. With a decisive movement, She disarmed the leader, binding him with the wards of the castle. Victory, she realized, was not achieved through violence alone, but through understanding, perception, and courage, the lessons she had learned under the king's guidance. When the enemy retreated, silence fell over the castle once more. The wards faded, the shadows settled, and the castle exhaled, as if relieved that the danger had passed. Elara stood in the center of the hall, breathless but triumphant. She had faced fear, discerned truth, and led with wisdom beyond her years. The king approached, his presence calm and commanding. "You have surpassed my expectations," he said softly, his voice carrying a rare note of warmth. "You have learned to see, to act, and to trust. And in doing so, you have begun to lift the curse that has haunted this castle, and me, for centuries." Elara looked up at him, her chest swelling with an emotion she could not name. Gratitude, awe, respect, and something deeper, more intricate, all entwined. "I could not have done it without your guidance," she said quietly. He shook his head. "You could. You did it because you believed in yourself. You trusted what you could not yet see, and you acted with courage. That is the strength of heart I have waited centuries to witness." For a moment they stood in silence, the castle around them humming with quiet magic, the aftermath of the night settling into calm. The king's gaze held hers, no longer commanding or testing, but observing, curious, cautious, and almost tender. "You have changed more than this castle," he said finally. "You have changed me." Elara's heart skipped. She understood then that their journey was not merely about tests, lessons, or fear. It had been about transformation, trust, and redemption. She had entered the castle a novice, timid, and uncertain. She would leave it as someone who had faced darkness, mastered her fears, and illuminated the shadows not only of the castle, but of a soul long trapped in loneliness and curse. The king extended a hand, not in command, but in partnership. "Will you continue to walk this path with me?" he asked, his voice low, sincere, and compelling. Elara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the choice and the strength within herself. She placed her hand in his, not as a subordinate, but as an equal, ready to face the unknown together. "Yes," she said simply. "I will walk with you." A faint smile curved the king's lips, the first she had seen that was unshadowed by command, caution, or danger. "Then the castle, and perhaps the world, may finally begin to heal." The night faded, and dawn broke once more. Light spilled over the castle, touching stone and shadow, forest and mist. Elara and the king stood together atop the highest tower, looking out over the kingdom. The air was crisp and quiet, filled with the sense of a new beginning. For the first time, the castle seemed at peace. Its ancient curse, though not fully lifted, had begun to yield to the strength, courage, and trust of two souls who had dared to see truth in the darkness. Elara felt a calm determination settle over her. She had faced fear, discerned truth, and acted with courage. She had grown stronger, wiser, and braver than she had ever imagined. And in the king's presence, she felt not danger, but the possibility of something rare, a bond built on understanding, respect, and shared trials. The king's hand remained lightly on hers, a silent promise of guidance, protection, and partnership. He had taught her courage, perception, and trust. She had taught him that even a heart long trapped in shadows could be awakened, softened, and transformed. And as the sun rose over the kingdom, casting silver light across the stone towers and misty forests, they both understood that this was only the beginning of their shared journey. A journey of challenges, growth, and perhaps in time, redemption beyond what either had dared to hope for. Sister Elara, once timid and uncertain, now stood as a beacon of courage and insight. The vampire king, once feared and cursed, now felt the stirrings of a hope he had thought lost centuries ago. Together they faced the rising sun, ready to meet whatever trials the world, or fate, would place before them. In the silence of the castle, with shadows retreating and light slowly advancing, one truth lingered, unspoken but undeniable. Courage, trust, and understanding could illuminate even the darkest of nights, and even the most cursed soul could find redemption in the presence of another who dared to believe.